Hey everybody, thank you guys for joining in on a Sunday. I know it's beautiful weather here where I am, so hopefully it's beautiful where you all are. Our last panelist is about to get on. He's currently clinical, so give him a little time for that. But thank you guys for joining. I was gonna go ahead and have Kelsey and Nikki introduce themselves. They're two folks who are just finishing up their academic development time, and so I'll have them talk about what specialty they're interested in, um, how they found their research mentor. I know Kelsey did her research at her home institution, whereas Nikki went to a different institution, and just some of the logistical tasks they had to do beforehand to kind of make that happen. Kelsey, you're on the left of my screen, so I'll have you get started.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Kelsey. I am now a clinical PGY3 at University of Alabama at Birmingham. I'm originally from Texas. So I did 2 years of health services research with one of our surgical oncology faculty here at UAB. We have some, I guess, nice kind of infrastructure here that helps us sort of find and meet with potential research mentors like spring of our intern year. But I think that's something that's kind of reasonable to do, whether that's sort of set up or not where you're at. So I met with my eventual research mentor during my intern year. And then as a second year, kind of worked on getting research funding. So I applied to some external grants, like through the American College of Surgeons or the Association for Academic Surgery, the Society for University Surgeons. They all have different, like 1 or 2 year grants that can help support your research. I didn't get any of those, but honestly, it was a good exercise, like writing the grant. And then that was something that I sort of recycled to apply for a number of internal T32s. So some of you may be familiar with those, but those are basically grants that an institution gets from, NIH, or in my case, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, to support usually predoctoral and postdoctoral trainees in some field. So in my case, I ended up getting a health services research T32 through UAB, which was a great experience. And a lot of times there are T32s like tucked away in departments you may not even realize that could support surgery trainees. So I know here we have people on who are doing transplant research on a nephrology T32 or vascular research on kind of a, cardiology and blood T32. There's also a lot of places who have training programs through the VA. So they have a quality scholars program, which Wendy is on, and they help support quality improvement research, but you can a lot of times work on like outcomes for health services if that's something you're interested in. So kind of applied for that funding during my second year and then came out onto research and did 2 years of research after I finished my clinical second year. Happy to answer, whatever questions you guys have. I'm hoping to do surgical oncology. So it ended up working out for me that my research interests aligned with my hopefully future clinical interests, but that's not always the case. And I think if you have any interest in doing research like after you finish, being in a lab where you can learn the skills that you'd hopefully potentially use is huge, because those can be translatable whether you are in the field that you want to be in eventually or not.
Awesome, and we're just doing introductions really quick. I'll have Nikki go next.
Well said, Kelsey. Tough act to follow. I'm Nikki. I'm a general surgery PGY4 now, University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. And I did 2 years of academic development time at the University of Michigan between my 3 and 4 years in pediatric surgery. So I was a little non-traditional, even though that word is becoming really dynamic these days. I found out I discovered I wanted to do pediatric surgery kind of late in the take time off pathway. So I made that switch to pediatric surgery in the first couple of months of my third year. So I really had to, I would say, scramble a bit to figure out where my next 2 years lied, what I wanted to do with that, and kind of where my path would lead me. So a lot of it revolved around just honestly sending out cold emails, phone calls to program directors or like research directors on the APSO website, which is the National Organization for Pediatric Surgery. Because I was a third year, I was able to pursue a surgical critical care fellowship in the middle instead of just 2 years of research. So that was something of interest to me personally, just because I enjoy critical care, specifically in neonates. And it's something I'm finding is looked highly upon for fellowship for pediatric surgery fellowship potentially in the future. So it ended up working out nicely for very different reasons. So I did a year of that, and then I transitioned to a year of clinical research, both in outcomes and health services as well. So I'm happy to discuss kind of that unorthodox track, and then also interest in pediatric surgery and funding it. I would say I'd probably defer to Kelsey on that. As a clinical fellow in the middle of the 2 years, I had funding through ACGME for that. And then, as many of you probably know, Michigan is just teeming with funds for everything under the sun. So they had some gift funding that allowed me to pursue a second year of research. So I was kind of lucky in that regard.
Awesome. And Gilbert, do you want to finish this up before we dive into questions?
Yeah, of course. I'm Gilbert Murumwa. I'm a PGY 6, but a fourth year resident as of tomorrow at UT Southwestern. I did 2 years in the lab. Also want to do surgical oncology. I had a background in microbiology and kind of basic sciences from undergrad. And so I spent most of my time doing basic science translational research with mouse models and stuff, but also did a lot of disparities work and health services work. So kind of saw all the different things research could offer and tried to figure out what I would want to do when I'm done and actually in attending. So happy to talk about a little bit of that. And then we get funding to do research as residents without having to apply. But they incentivize us to get our own funding, and then they pay us as moonlighters. And so I, like Kelsey, wrote lots of applications and got lots of rejections before something stuck somewhere, but definitely a good exercise. And even if you don't get the money, is useful for starting your research time.
Awesome. And so folks have submitted some questions ahead of time, but if anybody at any points wants to unmute and ask a question or raise your hand or type one in the chat, we'll do that. I'm going to start with some of the pre-submitted questions to get us started. One of the kind of logistical questions was asking about like moonlighting and that being required or not through your different roles, and both required moonlighting as well as optional moonlighting, and just kind of what your all's experience with that has been. And so I know you guys both were all at different institutions, and so if you guys don't all mind answering, I think that'd be great.
I have a brief answer. I'll just play the fifth for most of it. But I think for me, I had the option. So my first year was a clinical fellowship, so that was kind of null and void there. But the second year, Michigan is interesting. They don't allow you to moonlight within their own system, but you can pursue other moonlighting opportunities outside of Michigan medicine, which I guess is good and bad, because I think other systems pay a little bit better, but also you have to then reapply for your license and I don't know, outside. And for me, coming in as a out of state resident, it was the process to obtain like a provisional license while not in a clinical fellowship, as well as kind of all the malpractice insurance qualifications, things like that took some time. And I figured all the time that would take to do that, I decided to just kind of take some time off for myself, focus on life. We can talk about that a bit later. So I think maybe Kelsey and Gilbert can provide some more context for moonlighting.
Yeah, I can go next. I think to Nikki's point, it's all dependent on the institution where you're at. So I stayed, with my home institution. We have some internal moonlighting opportunities like at UAB. And so that was nice. Those were totally optional. But we also had about like a required sort of 12 shifts a year, which is not that bad. It's like one shift a month. And that's just because our department like supplements our salary up to a PGY3 level salary, which is great for us. The T32 only pays you sort of a set amount, or, whatever funding people end up being on. And so it was nice to get supplemented. And then also it was a little nice to do. I did more moonlighting like initially when I didn't have as many projects and like wasn't doing as much. And it was nice to like have a little extra disposable income and also stay a little bit clinically relevant. I mean, you're going to be rusty no matter what when you come back. But it was nice to like get in the OR a few times and just sort of like stay. I'm not gonna say fresh because I didn't feel fresh when I started back this week, but just like remind yourself of some things and get in the hospital. But it's all institution dependent. So I would talk to either residents at your institution who have previously done research, or if you're going somewhere else like Nikki did, think ahead, because you will have to get, like you were saying, like separate state licenses and things like that.
Yeah, my experience here, traditionally we didn't have in-house moonlighting, so people would kind of get their license, then lots of different stuff around town. But I went into the lab right kind of at the peak of COVID starting, and so at first it was COVID ICU moonlighting, and I took those shifts, and that was fine. And then it was the SICU because the NP left to travel, and so they needed coverage there, and so we kind of got more in-house moonlighting opportunities. Where like UAB, we are required to do one shift a month to kind of cover the call pool for the regular residents to have like Friday nights off in the ICU. But if you have your own funding, they pay you as a moonlighter for those shifts. And so every place is kind of different in how they do it. I think it was for me, because it was surgical ICU mainly is where I moonlighted. Like my technical skills were rusty as all can be when I came back, but I still felt comfortable like treating surgical patients and thinking of surgical problems, which was I think nice. And I was doing basic science research, and so um, treating and thinking about people and not cancer in mice was a welcome kind of switch every so often when I was burnt out because my experiment hadn't worked and I needed to start over again. So everyone's kind of balance of it is different, but I really liked kind of the shifts I'd pick up and seeing my friends in the hospital and just kind of getting back into that world a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you guys for sharing. One of the questions was just asking about just the transition into research time. And so any tips on that transition period, and also related to that, how to stay organized in the beginning and create systems to help you stay organized during your time.
I guess I'll take the first stab at it. I think having a mentorship plan is really, really important. All of the awards and things you can apply for, part of I think the benefit of like doing it, even if you don't get the money attached with it, is it forces you and your PI and whoever you're working with to really come up with a plan of like, what is it expected that I do? Who's going to help me do that? Like, what's the kind of timeline for all of that? And so when you start, you don't have a bunch of projects usually kind of lined up, and your workflow is very different than the wake up, show up, and work 80 hours and go home without really thinking about what you need to do or where to be. Um, Research, you have to kind of create that structure for yourself. And so I think leaning on whoever's in your lab or your health services group or whatever it is you may be doing to kind of really hold your hand the first month or two and each day kind of help you figure out what it is you need to be doing. That helped me to kind of start making slow progress when I didn't know anything that I was doing yet. So I think having people around you kind of helping you with that transition is really key.
Totally agree. I think that amorphous structure coming from just routine, you do your work, you come home, you sleep, do it all over again, was almost overwhelming at first because you're like, I have all this time to do stuff, but I don't know what to do, especially the first month or two. And I think, for some who are within their institution staying there, sometimes they already know who their potential mentors can be because they're working with them clinically the first 2 years. I think from an experience of coming to a different institution, I had heard of some pediatric surgeons in the department, but I had never met them. I had interviewed with a few just to obtain the position. So I think really it's kind of a very non-formal term, but almost like speed date the attendings when you get there. If you're able to work with all of them or some of them, like learn who they are, learn what they do, what their research backgrounds are, what they focus in. Is it basic? Is it translational, clinical, HSR? Is it, a certain subspecialty, or are they like the person for X, Y, and Z? I think just getting to know their foundations can help you. Again, if you don't have a set mentor already or PI, just either select one or, uncover a little bit more relationship with one over the other. And I found that super helpful because even though I loved working with all of them, there were certain ones that I kind of identified with, both socially, professionally, and aspirationally. So I think that helped a lot if you're going to a different place. But I agree with a lot what Gilbert said is it's almost like kind of going into med school for the first time where you feel like you had your groove in undergrad and now you're like, you're a baller med school, but then everything changes because the volume of information is so much more. You have to learn a new way to study, a new way to organize. So I equate that transition similarly to that, where you have to learn a new way to organize yourself, It's a different type of learning, but it's also pretty fruitful. So whether that's using like an organizational app, I use something called Trello. I'm happy to talk about that later. It's kind of like a working board that you can put on your phone or laptop. You can use, you can use Excel, you can use all these other things. I'm sure others have input, but some way to stay organized in your new environment, I think is very helpful.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. I guess the only thing I would maybe expand on from what Gilbert and Nikki said are, one, if you do have a set, PI or mentor, is sit down with them. And I think it was really valuable for me to have like a standing meeting, so that the frequency of that may differ based on like how available your PI is. But I would have weekly meetings with my mentor, and it helps not only like have time for me to ask questions and talk through ideas or talk through problems, but also kind of helps hold me accountable to like bringing whatever I've done that week, that we can talk about. The other thing is that you can work on, like when right when you start, are a lot of times projects will rotate around like an abstract deadline for a meeting. It may be a little different for basic science, but a lot of times you're like, okay, we're working towards a October deadline for the Society of Surgical Oncology meeting or something, and that can help you sort of then back up and say, okay, we need the data by this date, we need the analysis by this date, and like an abstract draft, and you can kind of work backwards from there. So you can start talking with your mentor as you think through these projects about like, okay, where do we want, or what do we want to send, to what meetings this year? And then the other thing is, I guess two things is, one, in addition to finding out like maybe the surgeons or people in the department who might be a good resource or people to work with, I think in the first few months, go to a bunch of these like lunch lectures or things in related fields. Maybe it's through your T32 or other funding source. Maybe it's like through the School of Medicine or School of Public Health, depending on where you're at. But there are so many methodology experts around that, like, that was one thing I had no idea, all these people were there. And there's like, PhD in geography who does like cool geospatial stuff, or somebody who's an expert in social determinants of health who can like really boost the legitimacy of your work, especially if you're doing outcomes and health services research. So spend some time like going to, hear people talk, or just like absorb what else is going on around campus, because that can help you think about like how to build on your projects. And I'm blanking on what the last thing the last thing I was going to say is, think about what skills you want to try to build over the next 2 years or however long your research is. So for me, I hadn't really done that much statistical analysis on my own at all. Like, sure, I can do a t-test, but really didn't know. So a lot of places may provide funding for you to do a master's degree, or even if you don't do that, like take some classes. But think about specific skills that you want to build, and then like come up with a tentative plan about how you're going to do that, so that by the end of the 2 years, you can look back and, there's things that you can then, take with you when you leave research time.
That was a great segue.
Yeah, and I think like,
no, go ahead, Nikki.
one thing to add, I promise it'll be a good segue, I hope, but I think I was gonna say, like, be honest with yourself with what you want to accomplish, like Kelsey said, and like what your, I'm equating it to paper, but like what your CV looks like now and what you hope it to be, because I think that's a lot of, not to chalk it down just to the CV itself, because there's a lot more experiences that are to be gained, but just take a look, an honest look at it by yourself, with mentors, with attendings, and hey, you are somewhere I want to be in 5-10 years, like how do I get there? So show them, and they will have really meaningful feedback, and even if you don't get there by the end of your 2 years, like you can be on your trajectory to that. So sometimes it's acknowledging your own limitations and weaknesses, and then using these resources, as Kelsey said, to get to where you want to be after 1, 2, 3 years.
Definitely. And one of the questions was asking about what specific skills you all wish you had either coming into your research time, or I know, Kelsey, you mentioned kind of stats and wanting to develop that skills. Were there other skills that you did develop during your research time that, had been part of your goal, or things that you wish you had that, if you could go back, you would grow further?
And to Nikki's point about being honest with yourself about what you could get done, I had one of the guys who was coming out of the lab when I went in, kind of jokingly remind me that there's 52 weeks in the year. And so if you take a 2-year research fellowship, every week is 1%. of your time. And so you can have this ambition to do 20 million things, but you really have to think about what can I actually get done, knowing that like every 7 days I'm another 1% closer. And so basic science was my main focus, but I want to be like a translational researcher much more than I want to have a lab where I'm really the one running mouse models. And I wanted to learn a lot about clinical trials, and we offered kind of coursework we could do and classes you could audit. But I had to kind of sit down and be like, there's really no way for me to do the basic science work I need to do the health services stuff that I'm kind of passionate about in disparities, and also audit this class. Like that's just not, not enough hours in a day. And so I didn't do any clinical trial stuff during my 2-year research time, because I figured that's something I'll just have to later on in my career figure out if that's still important to me. But I think having those conversations with yourself keeps you from getting in a place where you're overwhelmed or overstretched or unable to really deliver on any of the things that you want to. And so I think that starting with kind of the end in mind with, I have 2 years to get something done. What's the something I prioritize, and then kind of work backwards with how to get there.
Yeah, I would say, one of the main skills I want to learn obviously was stats. But to Gilbert's point, like being able to give a diplomatic no is also a skill. A really valuable one, actually, because when you're in research, people, one, you will feel like you have all this time to do projects or say yes or take things on. And also people may come to you with things that they want you to take on because they know you're on research. But you get to a point where, to what Gilbert was saying, like if you can't do a project well, then it is not, it's a disservice to you and to whoever's asking you to say yes to it. So I think that varies, by person and like what else you have going on. My classes were mostly valuable, but that sucked up some of my time, like doing the master's program. So, when you feel like you're getting to like a, I don't know, almost drowning point, it is better to tell somebody like, hey, I'm, really sorry. I just don't think I have bandwidth to do this. I wouldn't want to, you can say, I wouldn't want to take it on unless I thought I could like really see it through in a timely fashion. I just don't think I can right now. And that's like a respectful way to say, no, thank you. And if you want to work with that person or like you want them to keep considering you, you could say that. But I think that it is really easy to take on way too much when you're on your research time, and then you feel like you're drowning and you have a billion papers to write. And you will come out, at least I think everybody finishes research still with a few loose ends to tie up, but there's a difference between a few loose ends and like your world is burning and you've disappointed all your mentors and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So a diplomatic no is a good skill to learn too.
And you may, like at the beginning, you may just be picking up speed and you're like, yeah, I can handle this. And you likely will be able to because you're learning to manage the time and you're just filling your plates up. But then you'll have not just one plate, but 5 plates, and you can balance all those plates and not spill the food. So I think keeping all the plates up in the air requires your own cognizance, and then also tapping into your colleagues' bandwidth to see like, can we work together on this? Can I load the boat a little bit more? And like Kelsey said, like not over promising and under delivering, because that will tie to your reputation as a researcher, as a producer. And that will hinder people from coming to you again with other things. Now, I think one of the things I found helpful to say no, but almost say like I'm still interested, is list a few deadlines that you have impending. So like they know you're busy, like, hey, I have this with Dr. This, I have this project with Dr. Y, and this one with Dr. Z, but I feel like my plate will be opened up in maybe, let's say, 6 weeks. Like I would love to revisit this if that's feasible. And you kind of keep the conversation open without shutting the door, but letting them know that, hey, I'm still doing work. I don't feel like I have the bandwidth to take this on at this very moment. And you'll get to use the word bandwidth more than you ever would like to use bandwidth, but just happens.
And use your mentors to help you with those no's. Like there's times where people would approach me with things that I respected them, but wanted no part of that project. And me and my PI had a standing agreement where if there was something I just really didn't want to do, I could blame him. I could say, I thank you so much for considering me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope we could work in the future. Dr. Brecken's got me working on X, Y, and Z right now, and we're really focusing on that. And he asked that I don't take anything else on right now. And so, you know, and like I think it also helps with the rapport with your main PI or whoever you are actively working with when they know you're being considerate about your time and you want to deliver for what you've already committed to. So, it doesn't always have to be you bearing the burden of telling everyone no on your own. Use the people you've got.
That's super great advice. Somebody had asked a question about multiple mentors, but I feel like you guys kind of balance that a little bit here with talking about navigating that. One of the other questions was just wanting to hear a little bit about what your day-to-day workflow is like. Obviously, not every week is the same, but if you guys wouldn't mind, like what your routine-ish tended to be.
I think it's kind of cracked wide open now that there's the virtual option and not necessarily, again, for non-bench work, potentially non-in-lab, basic science type of things. I think the home aspect is a bit more open for business. But I think for me, largely it was, staying organized and like having your email calendar linked to all forms of technology. So you know what meetings you have, what deadlines are approaching, things like that. So a lot of my day-to-day revolved around prioritizing incoming deadlines versus, further deadlines and then further deadlines. So basically it was often like, okay, what do I want to get accomplished today? What do I want to accomplish this week? And then like this month potentially. And oftentimes if it was like a very busy season with impending abstracts, like I would plan out a calendar that said like from between these hours, I'll be working on like intro and methods of this paper versus during this hour, I'll be doing like this. So sometimes you can get super granular if you're feeling overwhelmed. That felt it was helpful to really just put, I wouldn't say minute by minute, but hour by hour onto your calendar. But other days are just kind of like, I'll work a little bit of here, a little bit of here, but I already know like overall what I want to get done. So, for me, I found it helpful to mix my week both in person and at home. I think it was nice to have some like time at home, family, friends, etc. But also being in person helps to continue relationships not only with your own PI mentor in person, but also other faculty, see what's going on around the department you're working at, and stay engaged that way. So I found, it's a little bit of a hybrid model, but there's many ways to go about it.
Yeah, I guess I would just add on to that by saying you can self-reflect on how you work best. So like I also, being able to work from home is kind of nice, but I know that I am at least 50% less effective at home than I am at work. And I like seeing people and stuff. So I would usually go into work like at, I had a little whatever desk cubicle thing at least 4 days a week. The thing I wish I had done earlier was block out time for writing where I wouldn't schedule any other meetings. I think especially if you're doing 2 years, the second year or whatever back half of your research time, it's less so like I'm doing analysis, I'm, writing an abstract where you actually need to sit down and do some more dedicated writing time for manuscripts. So I wish I had blocked out time, 3 hours on a Monday morning or something. I wish I had done that earlier. And then the other thing is sort of I like writing a manuscript or having that on my to-do list was more intimidating to me than some advice I got was like chunking it into like, okay, today I'm just going to write the results, or like tomorrow I'll do the methods, and chunking it into smaller pieces makes it more approachable. And then you can it's like a thing you can accomplish in, an hour or two or a few hours, instead of feeling like you have this big bear of a to-do on your list. So like Nikki, my usual workflow is, on Mondays, I would usually block out kind of what I wanted to get done that week and then try to sort of assign it to each day. You'll get more and more realistic as you go about like what is actually accomplishable. But yeah, I think breaking things into chunks is what worked for me, but it sort of is just like how you work best.
Yeah. And for me, I did really the same stuff as them. Basic science was my kind of baseline, and so I went into the lab every day. But then I'd kind of figure out and set up time where I would do the health services writing stuff on the side. The main thing though that I'm glad I was given the advice to do early is, again, thinking with like your end in mind. Me and my PI had standing meetings for every 2 weeks where we kind of just check in about the project. There was a postdoc in the lab who I talked to every day as he kind of showed me how to do things. But then like other people that were important but not like in my lab, like it's your professional development time. And so you want to be, I mean, most of us are building an application for fellowship during this time in a future career. And so I had a standing meeting with our chair every quarter. So I'd meet with him 4 times a year to give him an update on how things were going, what I was doing in research, what meetings I was going to. Our division chief is very hands-on with the residents, Sir Jonk, and so I'd meet with him also once a quarter or twice a year or something, just to kind of make sure that the people who are eventually going to write my letters and who are going to, take me to meetings and stuff, they weren't in the basic science lab and they weren't the ones who I was working with directly, but they had an idea of kind of what was going on, what I liked, what I hated, what I was thinking I may want to do for research down the road, and kind of, instead of giving them these big updates at the end of my research time, they kind of knew what was going on throughout.
Awesome. And then there's just one last question that was submitted beforehand. So anybody on, if you guys want to think about what questions you'd like to ask folks, I'll ask this last one. I know most of the folks on here, participant wise, are already in their research time or going to be soon. But one of the questions we got submitted was asking about getting into competitive specialties without dedicated research time. I know all 3 of you guys are interested in competitive specialties. You all did dedicated research time. So I suspect you're a little bit biased, but hopefully you also have some insight from talking to mentors and making that decision. So what advice would you give somebody if that's what they're considering?
I think it's a lot of realism in terms of the specialty, what your application would look like if you were to apply now, today, or next month, or whatever. And talking to as many people as possible who have done it various ways. Oftentimes, people will tell you there's only one way to do it, and sometimes that potentially could be the case, but there's always many ways to do the same thing. So I'd say talk to as many people as you can. Oftentimes, research time, the whole thing is, you get X number of publications or X number of abstracts, and you're just kind of enlonging your CV, which to a degree is true. I think initially that's how I thought about it, and it didn't hit me until kind of like the midway point where I was like, oh, I'm actually learning a little bit about professional development, what I want my career to look like, kind of meeting a little bit more people, not having to take vacation just to go to a meeting during residency and meet people and things like that. So like you said, Wendy, we're a bit biased because we did it that one way, but I think it's totally feasible for, I'm not sure if all subspecialties, but if you either have come in with substantial research before residency or have already tried to, put your hands in different pots all over the department in terms of trying to publish and work together with colleagues, it can be feasible, no matter what maybe other people would say. But I'd say be realistic with yourself and with people who are giving you advice in terms of, why you want to do it one way or the other, what you have coming into it. I don't know if Gilbert or Kelsey have anything else.
We have a couple of residents who have done that. I mean, this year, one of my good friends that I started residency with, she matched pediatrics with no dedicated research time. She kind of decided late and didn't want to take the time, and then, kind of was like, I'm going to do everything I can. And if it doesn't work, I'm at peace with it not working. And so I think the realism Nikki talks about is important, but I think the other part is the narrative. So you have to ask yourself, like, when someone asks why your application may be different than the norm for that specialty, it's all about how you answer that question. And so we had one guy who was he was in the Air Force, and the military wouldn't let him take time off, and so he just focused on being clinically the absolute best ever. And our chair in his letter was like, this is probably one of the best residents I've ever operated with. He's smart, he's a leader, he does all these things, he just could not take the research time, so he didn't. We've had other people who didn't take dedicated time, but like worked every second of every day that they weren't in research, doing little projects, closing stuff up for other people. I think if the answer is just going to be, I didn't want to do that stuff, I think that's a harder sell for you being successful in the match in some of these specialties. But again, I think it's all about you, your journey, your story, and your priorities, and knowing kind of as long as you're at peace with the work you put in and what you get out, there's a lot of paths to get wherever you want to go.
Yeah. And then the only last thing I would add, which Gilbert and Nikki have already alluded to, is just like having strong mentorship who know your story, like know, why you want to do XYZ, and not sort of shying away and be like, oh, well, like I'm nervous to reach out to this person. If that's the specialty that you identify that you want to be in, reaching out early, because they can help guide you through, okay, you're not going to do research. Well, we need to get you to XYZ meetings so you can meet these people. Or, I can get you on a project here or something like that, because those will also be the people who are going to advocate for you, not only in a letter, but make phone calls to people that they know. So having like strong, hopefully well-connected mentorship, even if you're not doing research, can probably help, push your case.
Yeah, I think that idea of a story, like that Gilbert said, is like pivotal. Like I think as we see application processes become a little bit more widened and holistic, and people will look for why you do what you do. And I think however you spin it, however you tell that story, whether it's with research, without research, with that time or without the time, will be important. So I think it's always important to keep in mind and like ground yourself throughout the process.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Elise, I see your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks so much. Hi everyone, I'm Elise. I just started my academic development time at UAB. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This has been really, really helpful. I guess my question pertains to everything you all talked about has been super helpful. My question pertains to something more specific in terms of, do you guys have any resources that you all used in terms of keeping yourself organized? Because I think it's so different from clinical years. That could be an app, that could be just your email, just making sure that you stay on top of what you do. And if you have any recommendations, that would be helpful.
I'm sure, I think I saw Wendy put her hand up when I talked about Trello, so maybe she can show you a little bit about that in person. But it's basically a workboard app that can be shared on your phone or laptop or whatever iPad. You can make different boards for different projects. You can make different boards for different positions. And basically within each board, you can have different columns. So for me particularly, it's hard to describe, but when you see it, you'll kind of get the feeling. It helped me organize all of my projects by what phase they're in. So each column was a different phase. So like, I just an idea, IRB in process, IRB submitted, IRB accepted, abstract drafted, things like that. You get the point. But you can actually drag each project from left to right or right to left or different back and forth. So it kind of keeps you honest as to what needs to be done for each project. And I also had another workboard similarly in parallel that was with each faculty. So like Dr. X, I would have these projects listed, and then Dr. Y, I'd have these projects listed, so that every time I met with that faculty to catch up, I could go through each project in an itemized list to recap what was going on. And then flip back to the other board to say, oh, this is actually at this phase. This is what I need from you. This is what I'm giving you today. Can we, and then another board would be like deadlines. So like ASC, for me, it's APSA, AAP, things like that. You would have what phase each project is in. I found it very user friendly. My sister, who's in like tech consulting, told me about it, and she like swears by it. And I drank the Kool-Aid. So recommend giving it a try, and maybe others at UAB can show you that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ones out there. We ended up making a similar dashboard kind of thing for our lab, my PA's lab. I was the first resident that worked with her, so I sort of explored some different options, and we made something called Airtable, which from what I've seen of Trello looks pretty similar. It's pretty like customizable, and you can like set up projects and statuses and things. The thing I did just for myself to keep me organized, because we had a bunch of like, that was for the whole lab, so we had med student projects and things like that, was I just had a running Google Doc, because it was easy for me to look at, on my laptop or a work computer. But I had a Google Doc, and I would use headings to sort of make for each week that I met with my mentor. And then I would sort of update my notes. I would have like things I want to talk about with her, projects like that are in progress, deadlines, like the order of my next manuscripts that I needed to write. And then whatever app or thing that you use, I think the most important thing is just taking some detailed notes when you meet with your mentors. Because you would be surprised how easy it is to forget, like, oh yeah, what journal were we gonna target for this thing? And then you feel stupid when you have to ask 2 or 3 times. So I think just taking detailed notes and like whatever source you use, trying to have some sort of like prioritization to it for what you want to like do next.
And like stick to it. If you pick one and you're like don't really love it and finding it's hard to remember to update it, then try a different one. But I think whichever one you decide to use, whether it's Google Doc, an Excel sheet with multiple tabs, or Trello or another app, stay consistent with it so it's like your one go-to for everything. You can pull it up quickly and give people updates when they need it and update it on the go, etc. So many right ways.
Yeah, I'm a Apple fiend and have Apple everything, and so it syncs nicely. I literally had a reminder list for every attending I had. I had a reminder list for like manuscripts in progress. I had a reminder list for upcoming meetings, just because for me it was I'm always on my phone, and so it was easy to kind of see the different things. But at any given time, I'd have 40 or 50 quote unquote to do items, not necessarily that they needed to be crossed off, but just visually I could see organized what I had going on for each of the different people that I was working with or each of the different things I had coming up. And then we get OneDrive from our institution with like 8 terabytes or something ridiculous of storage. And so that was my Google Drive I used. But I had a folder for each attending and then the type of project it was, and then whether it was the meeting that it was going to go to or the journal it was going to go to. And so I think the moral of the story is like just try to be hyper organized with everything. Take the guesswork and remembering out of it. There's enough difficulty just doing the research. Try to keep everything stowed away so that you can really easily get to whatever you need.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing your different systems. I think it's always interesting to hear from folks. Did anybody else who's on the call have any additional questions? I have a few more I'm happy to ask, but want to make sure you all get your questions answered as well. One question I had for you guys is, thinking back to your research time, I know you guys are all finished up. Is there something you wish you had done more and some tasks or things you wish you had done less in terms of you had like a do-over? Like what would you change, with the hindsight?
That's a good question. I think one thing which you can never really pinpoint, but I went into research here, especially after like finishing that clinical fellowship. I was like, this is the year I'm gonna get a hobby or get a couple hobbies and figure out something cool to do outside of the surgery bubble. And it stuck for a bit, but then just deadlines start happening and things like that. So I think a couple things that you may want to try outside of medicine is always helpful if you have the time and bandwidth to do so. Obviously, you're there for 1 to 2 years to achieve a certain goal, but I think there's other considerations which go beyond the hour we have is just life goals, life achievements, family planning per se, or other social I wouldn't say obligations, but accomplishments you'd want to achieve. So just be mindful of those two. Like it's totally okay to devote some of your time now to those things, family and friends, etc. But so I'd say I wish I'd actually stuck to more of those hobbies now, especially because I'm starting again tomorrow morning and have no more time.
I think learning that healthy no that Kelsey talked about earlier is the single best thing I did on research. I think that one thing, regardless of what you do, everyone kind of coming out of research time agrees on is like your perspective changes. Like the things that bother you in clinical residency or just life in general aren't the same. You mature to some degree. And I think that you realize that there's always more work to do. There's always more achievements, milestones, papers, whatever to like work towards. But that time with whoever is important to you, family, friends, significant others, whatever, I think that that's easy to kind of like push aside earlier in my training. But like the time when I was like I'm taking a week off for vacation and I'm gonna go see my little brother playing his first football game or whatever it is. Like those are the things that I honestly am the happiest I got to do during research over any of the papers or the other stuff that came along, because you always have the chance to do more work, but some of that life stuff is once you've missed it, you've missed it. So don't give yourself that room and space to use the time to do things other than just being the most academically accomplished person you could be.
It's okay to leave the laptop at home, as much as that might pain you to say, but yes.
Yeah, I don't have much else to add other than, I totally agree with what Gilbert and Nikki said. Like you will maybe never have this much flexibility back, other than the little bit of time like between residency and fellowship, or fellowship when you start a job. So take advantage of that. Go see family or take a trip or whatever it will be that will like bring you some joy. And then kind of to Gilbert's point about, each week is 1%, like be intentional about, if you're taking research time, you're taking 2 years away from your clinical training to be a surgeon, to get something out of it, hopefully. So like, yes, 100% there's value in like the personal stuff or, lifetime, but also be intentional about like, I need to get this stuff done because I'm taking 2 years out of my career, giving up 2 years of an attending salary, all the things to do this. So like, you know, try to stay motivated even when it gets a little monotonous and it takes months or, years to like get one project done. It can be a little sad, but like keep pushing through because there was a reason why you took that time.
Awesome. And then, you guys are all transitioning back. I know you had your first week back this week, Kelsey. Nikki, you go back tomorrow. What were some of the things you guys did as your research time was winding down to prepare to transition back to clinical life? Yeah, any insight, advice would be great.
I think the handoff is the biggest. We spoke about loose ends before, but you may not necessarily be able to tie up all the loose ends, but I think part of tying those up means handing over a project or offboarding a project to somebody else who's incoming in a very comprehensive way so that things aren't lost in the cracks. I think kind of closing up relationships, like for me, it was closing up relationships with faculty at this institution who I wouldn't see in person, aside from meetings. So kind of having offboarding meetings with them to see, to glean feedback. How could I have been better these last 2 years? What, I appreciate all the time, things like that. Is also grounding. And then, the whole thing about being rusty, I think everyone kind of comes to terms with that and, not moonlighting and having limited skills time in the lab. So I think, if you can do a little bit of that maybe, or kind of just prepare yourself, get some extra sleep, things like that. But I think mostly it's just making sure the projects are tended to either completed or handed off appropriately.
Yeah, 100%. Like your exit strategy plus minus a succession plan if somebody's coming behind you. So like think about, I don't know that I did a great job about this initially, but like think about what projects you can hand off, if any. So like there may be some things that are more straightforward or you're not as like emotionally attached to that you could recruit a resident coming in or somebody who's already in the lab to help you finish out. And it might give them something to like start out on, especially if they're just starting research and they don't have as much of their own projects built up. And then like I met with my mentor, or I had sort of planned out, like I have a few papers that I still need to write. So I tried to plan out like a tentative schedule once we had our rotation schedule for the year to be like, here's my accountability, to her and also to myself to be like, I'm going to get this section of a paper to you by, XYZ week or whatever. And I think depending on what rotation you're going back on, unlike any other year, basically you can go and shadow probably like whatever service you'll be on potentially. Especially if you're going to be at the same institution. If you're coming back from far away, that may be harder to do. But so like I went down and shadowed, the seniors in the trauma bay like the week before I started, more just like calm down my own nerves about coming back. Having not been there for 2 years, there's only so much operatively you can practice or plan for. Although you could like get on a lap trainer or robot trainer. But yeah, I think just trying to refamiliarize yourself with how that service runs, get all the orders or pre-completed notes that you need. And then if whatever you're starting on, you'll probably have brand new interns. And so figure out how you need to teach the interns. That was one of my biggest things I was like nervous about this week, but yeah.
For me, the only other thing that I'll add, depending on the resources you have at your institution, um, you're like the clinical stuff will just come when you get back. It's hard to prep for that. We've got a pretty robust sim lab at our place, and so I made friends with the postdocs that run kind of all the sim research we do, and I spent the last 6 months, I guess I had in the lab. I'd like made a schedule and blocked off time like once a week to go and hit the lab trainer or hit the robot trainer and just do as much that I could. Um, when I came back clinical, like my open skills were embarrassing. I was like, I don't even know if I tie square knots anymore. But I did feel a little bit more comfortable with the laparoscopic stuff and the robotic stuff because, that's something that I did have a reasonable way to practice and prepare for. So not everyone will have those things. And if you don't, lots and lots of residents have come back cold turkey from the lab and done just fine. It will be okay. But that's one thing that I was able to do that I thought helped me feel a little bit better when I got started.
Awesome. Well, we have 3 minutes left, so I feel like I'm going to have each of you give like a final parting piece of advice for folks who are going to be in the lab soon or are currently in the lab, something we haven't touched on yet. And then we'll say goodnight.
We touched on pretty much a lot of good stuff, so it's tough to add anything else. But I think just honesty through the whole process with yourself and with others is most important. Like it's okay to not know something or not know how to do something, especially because we've been taught this systematic surgical mindset in the last 2 to 3 to whatever years you've had before. And research is kind of a different game if you haven't done it before, had limited exposure to it. So there's a lot of diversity in research in terms of the methods. So it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to, kind of ask all the resources around you. And first of all, figure out what those resources are in order to maximize them. So just be honest with what you have, what you want to gain, and kind of the path along the way.
Yeah, I think maybe the only thing I would add on top of what we've discussed tonight is research is a great time, or academic development time is a great time to like, you have so much more time to sit down and think. So think about like your future clinically, what you want that to be. Do you want to do research, basic translational outcomes, health services, QI, whatever, when you get out, and like, what will you need to build? What skills will you need? What resources will you need? How will that affect like what jobs you want to look at? You will have time to sort of think about that and talk to different people while you're on your academic development time. So I think that's a great, it's just a great time to sit down and think. So really take the time for self-reflection and, use it to sort of propel you into whatever you want to do after you get out of your research time.
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything else to add. Just have fun, It's a great 2-year run, whatever you choose to do. And so be intentional, get what you want out of it, but enjoy the time.
Awesome. Well, big thank you guys for taking the time to talk with us all tonight. I know I found it really useful and insightful as I kind of start part 2 of my research time. Thank you guys, everybody else who listened in, and we'll add this to our new YouTube page. And I'm sure if anybody has any additional questions for folks, feel free to email me and I can get you paired up with the different panelists. But with that, have a good night, everybody, and good luck transitioning back on to Mario.
Thank you all.